Hello, everyone. This is our next webinar. This time we are talking about digital resiliency in these crazy times we are living in. So we have very short agenda for this day, and the agenda is short, but the discussion will be very, very interesting. We will talk about European cloud landscape. We will talk about how to prepare for what we cannot really prepare. So be ready for unexpected. What are the key concepts of the digital resilience? What the resilience really is? How resilience work or maybe doesn't work in public sector? And of course, finally, we will talk about the role of European cloud providers in all of this landscape we are having now. So welcome again. Please leave your comments, questions. We will answer them in our social medias. And let's go to the topic. My name is Paweł Piwosz. I am developer advocate at UpCloud. And I'm really happy to have today with me two great guests, Teemu and Otso. So Teemu is the Chief Product Officer at UpCloud. Teemu.
Nice to meet all of you through this webinar and awesome topic we have for today. And not only from the usual private sector companies point of view about the resilience and sovereign, but also from the public sector point of view.
Exactly. And we have the pleasure to have really great guest in two hats, really. Also, Chief Executive Officer in Haltu and also Helsinki City Councillor.
Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar and greetings from here from cloudy Helsinki.
Yes, we are talking about cloud, so the weather is good for that. All right, so let's go to the European cloud landscape, right? And let's discuss a little bit what's going on in this, because we have different things happening, right? On the many fronts, from the political side, from the regulation side, from the technical side, and so on and so on and so on. So I'd like to ask you, Teemu, first. How do you see those changes today, right? Because it's a very dynamic market at this point.
Indeed it is. And not only on the market, but also the geopolitical situation that we are currently facing. You have diplomatic tensions rising here and there. You have trade policies shifting, discussion on those companies and, well, public sector, institutions and agencies trying their best to navigate these waters. And I think it's in Europe, we have a number of good platforms, not solely on cloud, but on other industries as well. So the thing for companies to also bear in mind nowadays is that should you basically base all your business infrastructure on top of a single provider from outside of Europe, and also think about your own strategy going into the future. What gives you the best possible way to maintain control of your data, your operations, your services, but also allows you that possibility to, well, create those novel and innovative services for your customers while knowing that your backbone of your business operations, be those operations in cloud or somewhere else, are secured, and you can then with a confident mind just concentrate on growing your own business.
Yes, exactly. I think also there is another important element here, because we have, like, okay, let me say this way, three big vendors which are offering a lot of services, tons of them, right? And we have smaller vendors offering very dedicated, very well-crafted services. And these differentiations, what you really need as a customer, is also important, I believe.
And it comes again. Go ahead.
I would jump to even bigger picture here, because if you look at the uncertain time and where we are, this decade has seen huge shift on what kind of world we live in, what kind of world we believe we live in. And suddenly we start to think, we have to think about unthinkable things and expect unexpected things. Like we had a pandemic, and now we've had like classical World War II style war for several years in Europe. And really, we used to live in a world where it was obvious the clouds are run in US, or sometimes the data centers might be outside US, but the US companies will host everything for us. That was kind of like given. And suddenly, that still is the case. They are there, but it's not anymore certain. And that is the big change and big challenge. And it's a bigger thing. It's not only about what is the best solution. It's also about what is your contingency, how you guarantee the operation, you're running, keeping up your operations. So it's like it might even become a question of survival. And this is a bit dramatic way to look at it, but we are, let's say, this is like traditional Finnish thinking. I get more into that later on.
But I think right here, because we should overstate sometimes a few things just to, give us the proper attention to things, right? Then we can calm down a little bit, yes. But, stating the problem a little bit bigger than it really is helps us to be better prepared, right?
Yes.
And those things are something what we can easily touch, what you mentioned before, but also like we have on the slide, the tariff stuff, right? The situation where we are also in very unstable economy. I think this is also something what is impacting us, right? In not only on every single level, I would say, even for the like country or city, plans and evaluation what's going on, right?
Yep. Yeah. There could be tariffs on cloud services starting tomorrow. In a year. I was about to say tomorrow, but realistically, it takes a little longer than that. It takes at least a couple of weeks, but it's still very short time. And suddenly your cost structure changes entirely upside down.
Exactly, because those tariffs can be like 100%, because why not, right?
Yeah.
Uncertain times and well, as the saying goes, very hard to see the future is, especially given where we currently are. But not just on the potential cost structures and shifts here and there, whether those be tariffs or some other trade policies. I think companies in Europe as a whole kind of also needs to make sure that there is that strategic autonomy. We are able to come up with services that are able to compete with our competitors in the States, and obviously create the value within EU borders as well. This is one of those things that we can hardly be in a competitive posture or at the core of innovation if we are so readily comfortable sending our money to overseas giants. Now, as we talked, to drive home the point, you gotta have to be simplistic and do these overgeneralizations. But I think it's one of those things that we, for the past 10 years or so, we've grown so accustomed to think that the world of AWS, GCP, and our good friends in Microsoft, well, that's the place where there is no other options on the table. And as we are here talking about that today, is that there actually are alternatives, and I think it's a one of those fundamental shifts in thinking that you gotta have to build your business operations, your architectures, and the business backbone on top of several pillars, not just one.
Yes, exactly. And I think that when we consider many parameters here, like what kind of services are offered, what kind of technologies are offered, what kind of stability of the services is there, right? We should be proud of ourselves. We don't have the scale. Yes, of course, but it's obvious, right? So I would say the main difference is in the scale, not necessarily with the offering itself, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's not just about business innovation and creating new services and so forth. It's ultimately also, most likely we are going to come back to this topic, but the data sovereignty, where your data resides, who operates it, who owns it, and ultimately under which jurisdiction do you operate? It's plain and simple as that as well. And
Yeah.
these are the kind of things that I think, were not too much in the centerfold of discussion in the past 10 years, but are even more so coming back now, or not coming back, but actually like surfacing right now.
But Teemu, and it's not enough that you ask who owns it and who operates it, because there's like, from political science, there is the ruling by exception that you control the thing you can shut down. So the question is, who can shut down your access to your data?
Yeah,
True.
And we will see, and I think, guys, we've seen, not going into polemics here, but those services in Europe that are procured from overseas might get shut down if the decision is done that way. Not going to go into very specifics, but the danger is there, and the uncertainty at most is there.
Yes. It's something we hope not to happen, but you have to consider the possibility.
Yes. This is about the resiliency, right? And be prepared for unexpected. And I think the topic of data is part of the cloud landscape as well, because it's not only in which server it is located, in which data center it is, right? Where, in which city, which country, or whatever, but also who owns these things, right? As we have different acts and so on and so on and so on. So we will go to that. And honestly, just to start going to that direction, I said, like, in one meetup recently, that we should add to the weapon of mass destruction. Really, we have ABC. Right? We should have ABCD data on the end, because this is also kind of the weapon, right? It's digital weapon, but still very, very powerful. And with this optimistic opinion, let me go to preparation. What we can do, because we have a lot of different dangers, right? Starting with let's say simple, in quotes, one, right? Like severing the cables on the ocean floor. What is not that, well, for me it will be hard, but generally it's not that hard, right? What will be hard will be the fixing this, right?
Yes, uncertain times, and things you might not even have prepared for in the past, sort of like unthinkable things just like 10 years ago, I would say. But also, like, even for providers such as UpCloud, we are not here stating that we have unlimited amount of connectivity paths or connectivity routes, but it's rather more on the companies to think about the environment that we currently live in, and what does that pose you as a, for example, decision maker, chief information officers, directors, and such. You have your redundancy hopefully built in through multiple regions and availability zones and DCs, data backup, disaster recovery policies hopefully in place, and solutions to support those. And obviously, as we talked about, the network resilience, not to speak of application level tolerance and these kind of things. And as we just witnessed a couple of days ago, internet is not so robust as we kind of think it is, given the problems the AWS Eastern Coast faced. So there are, and I think, Pavel, coming from you as also our developer advocate here in UpCloud, what would be kind of your take on building that resilience in architecturally and taking into considerations these turbulent times and the unthinkables we currently face?
Right, this is a great question, Teemu. Thank you. And what I said after this outage, it was like one small misclick for one man and big outage for the humankind, right? So, like, going into the like most known quotes. But yes, this is very, very important topic, and I think it brought back some discussions related to resiliency, but on different levels. Because very often what we see or what we hear during the architectural discussions is, okay, I want to be resilient, highly available, so I will use 2 zones, right? Then someone else comes and says that, like, senior architect, and says, no, we need fault tolerance, so we need to have 2 data centers, so 2 regions, and so on and so on and so on. And that's it. It doesn't matter what kind of region do you have using one provider, because the problem lied in the central part, right? So generally, you were off completely. That's why the strategy to differentiate how you run your workload, where you run your workload, what kind of disaster recovery strategies do you have, how much you can pay for those disaster recovery strategies is also important, right? So the topics of multi-cloud, the topics of building the resilient applications, not necessarily in the way that, yes, even if something is happening, you can run it, without any disruptions all the time. That's great for really critical applications, but not necessarily needed. You have to be sure that you are able, in case like this, to run or bring back your services relatively quickly with relatively small loss of information during this time. That's why those RTOs, RPOs, and so on and so on and so on, right? So restore time objective, restore point objective. When you have this defined, it's the really small step forward, because there is the next one. You have to be really prepared for that. You have to test it. You have to exercise it. And this, I think it's a good moment to go to these key concepts of this digital resilience, right? So the thing which I started to mentioning is this risk assessment. Know what you can expect, and even more importantly, be prepared for something what you don't know. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but knowing what you don't know is really, really important. I think it's I took a couple of minutes, but I can go more. But I think also from your perspective, it looks.
I wanted to bring up here that as you had a good description of the resilience, and there it's important part to think there's different risk scenarios. Some are like more minor, like AWS going down for a day. Sounds like a big thing, and it is a big thing, but it's not the biggest risk, obviously. Like, it's not the like most big, but it's something. And then you have to think, how far can you afford? What you should be preparing for, and where, I mean, because you cannot prepare for everything, and then none of us has unlimited resources. We always could say that we multiply everything between multiple cloud providers, but it probably doesn't make sense in all cases. But you always should do the assessments and think, what are the parts we absolutely need to keep running on all times at any cost? In a company, you could say nothing. If the whole company shuts down for a day, we will survive that. Okay, fine. But then in public sector, for example, we cannot say that if the heat delivery and if the water delivery in Helsinki region go down for a day, in the winter, we start to have people die. So we have to prepare. And then it's a question like, really, does the system, if the system shuts down, no matter what we do, then what are the next steps? You have some kind of contingency plan. And again, it depends a lot on what are we concretely talking about. For example, I was talking in city of Helsinki with a person responsible for operation. They keep up and running something like 40 or 50 internal services. And when I asked them, okay, which of these are mission critical? Then the bottom line is none of them was mission critical, because those were the operations. The city needs them to operate normally, but if they are shut down, everyone will survive that. It will create difficulties, it will cost money, but then it's sufficient to think that, okay, they were running them on Azure. If they would lose Azure suddenly and permanently, how long it would take to start bringing the services up on some different environment? Maybe a month, but in most of those cases, a month was acceptable. So then that's a level of preparedness, is that you know that it is possible to start porting them to a different cloud, and you know where you would start doing that, so that you don't have to start from zero, but you can start go rapidly to what you need to do. But on many cases, that would not be enough.
And one thing to add to that discussion is that now in number of these cases, people usually consider, for example, providers such as UpCloud when we talk about migrating workloads from bigger hyperscalers and so forth. Is that it's a binary kind of thing, all or nothing. That shouldn't probably not be even the starting place, but it's actually, for example, if I take our point of view, it is that yes, it would be awesome to get all of the workloads from our customers from our competitors and so forth. But we are here for those 5%, 15% disaster recovery solutions, backup solutions. Those are the things that when companies do their assessment, and hopefully internal, or not internal, but public companies, well, public agencies, institutions, it's about how do you build that resilience in. And then we go into this, what Pavel, you mentioned about the multi-cloud strategies and whatnot. It's about ultimately how you make sure that you can maintain your autonomy, function independently. I think these are hugely important topics for anyone leading operations, IT operations, and so forth. And that requires that you look at it from a little bit vaster perspective or footprint than a single provider, saying you are comfortable with having your services being down for days on end, but rather how you can obviously work in the first place to prevent them from being down. And that, I think, is whatever you call it, multi-cloud strategy, hybrid strategy, your redundancy plans and so forth, that should be at the centerfold of the thinking there.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and if you're running something on a different cloud, it means you have the agreements, you have the access to the cloud, you have the people who know how to use it, so you can start putting things there when necessary. That's a big difference from starting from nothing.
And that's also, guys, now the risk assessment here, we really kind of delve deeper into this. It's nothing, it's not a rocket science. It's just, map your dependencies. Look at your data flows, where your data resides. And over, as we talked about the compliance, look at the gaps if there are any. And just I think this should be run-of-the-mill work in a number of companies in the private sector or public institutions, organizations alike. I think it would be a not so good situation if you have now. Now, obviously, then you do your due diligence, as we said, and the contingency plan that we basically talked here for a host of minutes, and the multi-cloud strategy as well. But guys, one more thing. Also, I know this is important stuff for you, but I look also the open source solutions and the closed source solutions. Obviously, from my perspective, UpCloud has built its whole stack on top of open source solutions because we want to maintain our autonomy and independence and provide the best possible solutions with the right price for our customers. But how do you guys, Pavel, and also see the from your perspective these discussions? Well, how does that relate to the resilience and also the sovereignty?
Yeah, I think in tech sovereignty, the open source is a significant factor because there's the challenge that American companies are in very many aspects far ahead any competition in Europe. There are several American products all of us would like to use, obviously. And if we would just say, okay, we cannot use anything that created outside Europe, that would be quite big downturn for pushing us back. Oh yeah, it will push us back a decade or a couple. So open source is on that dilemma partial solution, because when you are using an open source solution, it doesn't matter, well, it doesn't matter that much where it is actually built or where it is created, because
the ownership is distributed.
Yes, if the ownership is distributed, you can run it yourself, you can audit it yourself, and even if you are using it running wherever, you have the backup strategy of running it yourself if need be. And that's a significant difference. And I'll point out one more thing that is important in public sector, in governments in particular, is that things are always also political. If you are vulnerable for someone else shutting your operations down, they have a stick they can use to poke you and demand something entirely different from you, basically blackmailing. And as we are seeing in what happens in USA, we notice that actually this also includes companies. Suddenly in US, big companies have to worry about what the president thinks of them. And that matters on what kind of deals they can make between private companies. It depends on the opinion of the president. So even companies are not safe from political considerations. And there, at least some level of autonomy that you can believe in it yourself, that you have some kind of even bad backup plan is better than not having, because then it's one step harder to push you and force you to doing recessions on something else. And I bring a bit more out why we are talking about resilience here, I think, because in broader sense, it's digital sovereignty where we discuss what kind of ecosystem we have for creating innovations and so on. But resilience is a bit narrower concept, containing that the risk scenarios and how we prepare for uncertainty. If you don't have the sovereignty, resilience alone doesn't help us in the long run, but it helps us in the bit shorter run and midterm. It helps us to look on how we run things. And in Finland in particular, we have a long tradition of thinking about resilience because we are living here right next to Russia. And honestly, Russia has been always somewhat unreliable and there's unexpected things happening. So being prepared for those in various manners is like part of the national thinking. But in the digital landscape, we haven't been as ready as I would like, let's say. There's a lot to do more there.
And I know very well what you are talking about living in Poland.
Anyway, sure.
So, open source still has some misconceptions in heads of many people, but it gives us like real freedom. And think about this like this. Normally, yes, you can have, for example, I don't know, DVD-ROM with some software you are using, right? So you are secure, but still, it's closed software. Probably it might contain some vulnerabilities, some backdoors, anything like that. It's very hard to learn about this. Open source, you can just download on your device or fork it and do something for yourself, right? Examples of this? Well, recently we have OpenBAO, we have OpenTofu, we have Valky, right? In longer terms, we had OpenSearch. All of those projects became like very popular for different reasons, yes, but still those things were created just to enhance and cherish this freedom, right? And another very important thing is if you have proper people on board, they can go through the code, read it line by line, and understand very well what is the risk there, right? What is impossible? No, it's not impossible, but it's harder, much harder with the closed software. And as I said, many companies still are afraid of open source software. But for those people, I have only one comment. If you are really afraid, do you use Kubernetes? Do you use Linux? If so, what we are talking about, right? And this leads us to another part when we think about open source, how the public sector is run. I heard personally for many, many years that government of this country or that country switched from closed software to open source or back, or different directions, let's say. Also, from your perspective and as an experienced person from this public part, how do you see open source software, which is dangerous and so on, because it's open, everyone has access to the code, right?
Yeah, obviously, all the software is dangerous. You never know when the robot uprising will happen, and then suddenly your toaster will try to kill you.
That's why I'm saying always thank you very much to OpenAI, yes.
Yeah, it's a good practice. They will maybe say spare you when it happens. But yeah, in open source, actually, I believe in public sector, in government, all the software they critically need should be open source, because then you have it in your own hands, or at least you have the possibility. From 10 years back, I managed to push through in Helsinki a decision that all the code that is built for City of Helsinki should be published open source. And that has been, it hasn't been followed 100%, but quite well. And nowadays there is several open source products built by City of Helsinki or commissioned by City of Helsinki for specific public sector needs. And that means that those same products can be used. For example, we are providing in my company Haltu, we are providing City of Turku some products that were originally built for City of Helsinki. And then we are providing to City of Kouvola products that were built for City of Espoo. So there's efficiency benefits on open source because everyone can use it in these kind of situations where it's governmental. But it's also more about the sovereignty, that where are you dependent on? And the vendor lock-ins are, at least in the Finnish discussion, they are relatively well known nowadays in those circles where people purchase software, because it is kind of obvious if you have only one vendor for what you are doing, in the long run, they can charge you however much they like if you are critically dependent on it. And there is no easy way around that except with open source.
Yes,
because
sure.
then you can just change the vendor. If it becomes too difficult, you just change the vendor.
Yes, and from your perspective as a very important person in Haltu, how this cooperation using open source with the public sector looks like, because we often fear that the public sector is so far, back in the medieval ages with everything and so on and so on. They don't understand technology and so on. How it looks from your perspective?
Some people know more, obviously understand more, and others understand less. And if you go to a smaller municipality, it's not realistic to expect they employ a single person who knows what is open source. But let's say they need a system. They need, for example, we sell them system to run daycare ERP. Then they don't need to understand open source. They just need an ERP. They can look, okay, this is a nice ERP. We provide them the slides and show how it works, and they can compare it to different solutions. And if they like it, and if the price is reasonable, and the price usually is reasonable because we are talking about open source, because we are not paying the cost of development ourselves then. So we can provide it in relatively a reasonable price. So then for them, it can be just yet another system for running their daycare operations. And if they're happy with it, they take it, and they don't have to care about the open source part. The open source part comes in at the moment if we start to work badly with them, or let's say we are, as a company, we are bought by some American giant and everything is moved to US or whatever. And then they can just, we would like to keep running the same system. Well, put the bid out. Look, there you will find some software house running it for you.
Yes.
So it comes as like resilience. You don't have to care, but when you need to care, it's possible.
Yeah, and that what leads me in kind of circle back to what Teemu you said really about providing services with the best possible costs, right? And it's also part of being resilient, right?
It is.
How do you see this in terms of what we have these two definitions on our slide about what is resilience and what is the digital resilience? How much, let's say, advantages we can get as a provider, as we are, right? To different organizations like public sector, of course, because, well, if public sector is buying something, we are paying for it, right? So is this the good direction? Is this the best direction for us?
I think ourselves, UpCloud and any providers in the business also educating the buyers. Not obviously I'm part of my friends, but screwing them over. So I think for us it's always look at them to give them the tools for success. And our values here in UpCloud and the way we operate is that, for example, we do not consider that we should put our customers or our partners in a situation where they feel that they are tied to our portfolio and an offering, but rather that they choose to do that based on the trust that we are able to build into our relationship. And I have the habit of saying that we build the trust on an hour by hour, minute by minute, day by day basis, not through annual agreements or a license plan spanning 2 or 3 years and so forth. People who have engaged in these discussions with, let's say, with Microsoft know the deal. But the thing is also that it's the relative autonomy and independence of our customer companies, be those in private and public sectors, that I believe is the key for us to win as well. We provide them a host of solutions that they themselves can either run if they want to operate their own infrastructure, or take it as a managed service if they want to raise the abstraction level and be comfortable for us doing the work kind of for them in a sense. Also the tooling for us, when we look at this, is the solution portability and data portability as well. Again, we might go with a strategy of creating a architectures that tie our customers to us in a way that they can never get away from that, or it will be very hard for them. But rather we kind of want to create a portfolio where they choose us time and time over again, because it just fits their needs. Yes, there might be a host of needs that we can't fulfill, but the ones that we do, we want to make our damn sure that we do that well. So again, going back to the question on the resilience, appreciate the customer's autonomy, ability to act independently, make right choices, do these things right, and put these on the center for the most likely you are going towards success in at least some form or function.
Yeah, and so we have here two questions, which I will answer the first one. So what you're gonna do when the thing is hitting the fan? Well, I hope that the city is still able to deliver the water to have a shower. So, also, question to you: are we prepared for digital to survive without this digital resources and everything what we have outside Europe? So, should I have the bucket with water in my home?
But like in Helsinki, we have underground places for everyone. Every resident in the city can go underground, and there actually is prepared for the water for them.
Good.
But also in digital systems, for example, I know if we suddenly would lose, let's say, all current communication software, like the city is using Teams basically, and email, Microsoft email setups and so on. If they would suddenly lose all of those, there is a backup plan. There is a backup solution. Even I wasn't told what exactly it is, but there is something thought of, because we have this tradition of preparing.
Yeah.
But then it would be a huge problem. And in most cities and municipalities in Finland, I can say we are not ready. Then it would be back to papers and pens.
Okay, so if you like drawing, Otso is waiting for you. Anyway, so let's talk about this. How we can build this European sovereignty? How we can build this European resiliency? How do you see it? Because as you mentioned, we lack sometimes even foundations of few things, right?
I think these 4 blocks here, they're good. They are not like a technology stack, but they are more like principles of operation, considerations to take into account on every decision, like starting from the bottom with the crisis resilience. That's what we've been talking most of this webinar.
Yes.
What kind of attitude you need there. Then Teemu brought very well up the trust and transparency part, and how company like you or like we must and should have the customer's best interest as our guiding principle, and provide customer the means to assess if we are doing that successfully. And the autonomy part is then also, again, on every decision, think, how does this risk our autonomy? How much can we increase our level of autonomy? It's never black and white. We don't live in a world where you can, or if we would shut down all the borders in the world, we would be all quite hungry quite soon. So we live in a interconnected world, but you can increase the level of autonomy. And then obviously data, who owns it, who operates it, and who can shut it down.
Yes.
This is the, like, as Otso mentioned, like usually in these webinars you see a whole lot of pictures on architectures and tech stacks and whatnot. This is a foundational framework for framing your thinking on this. Few things. Again, looking at data governance, what legal control, is there for the provider, and for example the US Cloud Act, EU Data Act, and so forth. Be mindful of that, because the location of your data is under some jurisdiction. So I think it is up for everyone in be those in private sector companies or public organizations to look into that. First of all, is also when you do your we talked about the assessment. What business critical data are you running and where, on top of which? What are your fallback plans, backup plans, and the whole system-wide redundancy? And then if you look at again the autonomy of action, we talked about how that's a central tenet in the whole resilience and so forth. So do you have that independence of action? Do you have exit strategy that you can implement? These kind of things. I think those are non-negotiable things for a number of companies, be those again in the private sector or in the public sector. And finally, few things that I always kind of like to stress and point out is that the resilience stems from your ability to maintain your operations by yourself continuously and recover from disruptions. It doesn't have to be, geographical military tensions we currently face in Europe. It can be as small things as outages in existing platforms. And then the sovereignty, which is you should be able to act independently, maintain your control of your own data. So the subjectivity lies there with you. You just can't outsource that in any form or function. And therefore, it kind of all circles back to what do we do currently in Europe and even in Finland and so forth, in the private sector and public sector. If we are comfortable going forward like this, I think that we are not particularly taking charge of our own destiny going forward, but we are, again, kind of reproducing that attachment and dependency on a few providers. And in this uncertain world that we've been describing and talking about, I think it's a little bit short-sighted and ultimately not so wise course of action or thinking.
Yes, and I
And
think that what we see really on the market today is the new migration, let's say, of thinking from data globalization to data sovereignty. Because it's
yes,
not only where your data is stored, what we mentioned a couple of times, but also who is in charge of the equipment where your data is stored.
Yeah.
Because we have our regulations, right, which say, shortly speaking, that you should take a lot of care what is going on to happen with your data. But also we have the other regulations in other countries, like for example Cloud Act, which allows federal institutions in US to ask kindly, of course, for the data which theoretically are stored in Europe, but on the equipment owned by US company, right? So those things are more and more important. So also, what is your take here?
Yeah, I was pointing on that really actually just last week, we got a decision from the governmental data privacy operational. Basically, it's like it can be still appealed in court, so it's not yet a decision, but it's like quite strongly. And basically, it said to two governmental organizations that their operations in AWS and in Azure would need to have all personal data encrypted in order to be legal. So it would mean that most of the usage of Azure and AWS would become illegal in Finland. And that's how that will play out remains to be seen, but that points out like the level of risk external legislation elsewhere it was specifically because of the US Cloud Act. But I'd like to point out also that about the idea of digital sovereignty, that's of course a lot bigger game again, starting to discuss how we build new innovation, how do we have a competitive ecosystem in Europe. But there it's a bigger challenge, but starting to look at the questions of digital resilience, we start to look for solutions there, and at the same time we are creating the base work for digital sovereignty also, because we are creating demand for that kind of services in Europe, which will cause them to pop up. And there's been private interest on creating such services and funding companies creating such services. And I think that's something we can actually learn from the USA. The traditional European way of put governmental money here and there, that's usually not the best way. It's better if you create the demand that there's actual customers companies are trying to serve. And that's what we should do. If we start to demand that the public sector must be prepared, must have better resilience, that they must have European providers, there starts to be demand for European providers. And then quite likely we will have more European providers. We will come up with more innovation, or at least stealing ideas and building copies of American products, if nothing else. But that's a good starting point.
So I think you want to say that there will be a lot of jobs for DevOps and developers. Good. So
I should hope so.
We need to wrap up a little bit because we spent a lot of time already on this webinar, and we could spend many more hours. But I think it's a good time to wrap up, because we have some positive opinions on the last couple of minutes. So what is good, and I think that for me, the biggest takeaway from our discussion is that we can be very, let's say, competitional to other vendors. We as a Europe, right? We have a lot of knowledge here. We have a lot of capabilities here. I'm saying about Europe, not specifically or specific country, right? And we have the potential to grow, right? And very important part is to cherish open source. That's takeaway. So Teemu, if you could give us yours.
Yeah, of course. Adapt to threats to business continuity. This cannot be too much overstated. And as we talked, there's a whole bunch of approaches that you can do for that. Do the assessment, do your due diligence, look at your multi-cloud contingency plans, know your architecture, and especially get to know all the wonderful providers that are there alongside with your usual suspects. Also, the European cloud, building digital resilience, avoiding extraterritorial laws. This is the environment where you just can't escape. That's there. That is something for you to take heed. And also, we talked about the multi-cloud strategy. We talked about providers such as UpCloud. Even if you feel that whole migration of your workloads from another platform to providers such as ours is too big of a chore. You can't even imagine how much work would go into that. Consider that part as your multi-cloud strategy or hybrid strategy as well. We are here for specific needs: backupping, disaster recovery, edge locations where you can run your data and your software close to home. We are kind of just completing your own strategy, and are here for that as well. And obviously, do look into those open source solutions as well, because as we know, closed source is closed for a reason. There's usually a quite hefty business interests behind that, and most of those lead customers into situations where their independence and autonomy is a bit sacrificed.
I couldn't add anything to that. Thank you, Teemu. And
Yeah,
Otso.
you covered it all, Pavel and Teemu, very well. I just add that it starts with the thinking. That your mindset, you have to expect the unexpected and you have to think the unthinkable. And what you're gonna do when shit hits the fan. And then when the worst comes, if you have thought of that, then you know what you're gonna do.
Definitely, yes.
Yes.
Thank you for your opinions. And thank you very much, all of attendees and those of you who watched and listened this webinar. Here you have a couple of links you can use to be connected with UpCloud. Of course, I also encourage you to check Haltu. And thank you to our great panelists, Teemu, Otso. Thank you very much for your time and for very deep insights, very important insights, because we have the tendency to keep on the technical level. We need to go outside it. This is the basics for me, at least. So again, to all of you, thank you very much. And we hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and I'm sure you are waiting for the next one. Thank you and see you next time.